and gentlemen, welcome to this evening's semi-final debate. My name is Rachel W. Lee and I am the chairman of this debate. The timekeeper is Molly Jennings. This debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators who are Mr. Moulton, Ms. Shaw and Ms. Herden. The topic of this debate is that electric cars in Australia should not be exempt from fuel excise tax. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Glenunga International High School. The negative team seated to my left is from Westminster School. The speaking time for this debate is 4 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Lauren Plant.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that electric cars in Australia should not be exempt from fuel excise tax. We define the topic as electric cars being vehicles that use electric battery-powered motors instead of combustion engines powered by petroleum fuels. Fuel excise tax being a tax that is levied on fuel and petroleum products. For the purpose of this debate, we will only be speaking about its application to fuels used in motor vehicles. And lastly, exempt meaning excluded from, as in, electric cars should not be paying the above-mentioned tax. We, the affirmative team, believe that this statement is unquestionably true. Today's first speaker, I will be speaking to you about the growth of electric cars and how they aren't as green as they seem. Our second speaker, Hanson, will be talking about the importance of electric cars contributing to the fuel excise tax and how they shouldn't be exempt because of their low fuel cost. Our third speaker, Ishan, will rebut and sum up our team case. Now to my first point, discussing the projected growth of electric cars, which we must begin to accommodate. According to the Treasurer of Australia, Josh Frydenberg, there were approximately 4,000 electric vehicles on the roads nationwide. Because of this, their effect has so far been negligible. However, last year, there was a 160% increase in sales of EVs, according to the Australian Vehicle Council. The problem is, those cars will not be contributing to the upkeep of road infrastructure through the payment of fuel excise. If these vehicle owners don't contribute, then someone else must. And the chances are the person that contributes more will be less well off than the electric vehicle owner. As National Liberal Party MP Craig Kelly said, you'll have the richest person in Balmain buying a Tesla, subsidised by the bloke in Penrith who's driving a Corolla. The demand for electric cars is increasing as the world becomes more environmentally conscious. Electric cars are quickly becoming the future of motoring. Therefore, urgent reform of this tax is needed, as well as a revamp of how roads are funded to accommodate these long-term changes. This brings me to my second point, discussing how electric cars aren't as green as they seem, so drivers should not be rewarded. Electric cars are exempt from paying fuel excise tax because they are perceived as environmentally friendly and having no impact on the environment. They don't burn fossil fuels, but they plug into an electrical system that is run on fossil fuels, so they are therefore effectively using fossil fuels. As currently legislated, and by no fault of their own, electric car owners are freeloading on the roads and being subsidised by those who are yet to afford an EV. According to the Australian 2017 Australian Energy Update, published by the Department of Environment and Energy, renewable sources accounted for a measly 6% of all Australian energy consumption, so the vast majority is still from fossil fuels. These electric cars may be charged with electricity, but indirectly their power source is still fossil fuels. Their green credentials are also discredited by the dirtiness of their uncharged electric batteries. They contain a number of different materials such as lithium, mercury, and nickel, which are toxic to extract and toxic to dispose of. EVs should not be exempt from the fuel excise tax just because they are falsely advertised as green. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, there is no doubt that electric cars will someday dominate the roads. The petrol and diesel-powered engines are being abandoned. All electric vehicles are mandated in the policies of governments and motor vehicle manufacturers. Based on its current model, the fuel excise tax bucket of money will be empty. Like everything else that changes, we need to begin transitioning from the fuel excise tax to a road users tax that no one is exempt from. Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Tyron Wong.
Good evening, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that electric cars in Australia should not be exempt from car excise tax. We agree with the affirmative team's definition, however, we the negative team believe this statement is false. First, I would like to rebut the first affirmative speaker who tried to tell you that CO2 is still emitted into the air by factories. Now, think about this. Australia contributes to 85% of total car emissions annually. And that's where the main problem lies, not the factories. If Australia were to just use more renewable energy like solar, wind, hydro, those are all free, easily accessible, and they'll provide more than enough electricity for electric cars. As the first speaker for the negative team, I'll be discussing the ways exempting electric cars from fuel excise tax will bring environmental and financial benefits to the country. Our second speaker will tell you about the health benefits of electric cars and how they cause less damage to our roads. Our third speaker will rebut all the points of the affirmative team and sum up our team's case. Now to my first point. Electric cars in Australia should be exempt from fuel excise tax because they would bring huge environmental benefits to our country. With cars expected to continue as the largest source of transport pollution in Australia, it means that emissions must be slashed urgently if we are to curb our greenhouse gas output and meet our climate action obligations under the Paris Agreement signed by 185 United Nations members on April 22nd, 2016. In an article on the climatecouncil.org.au website titled "What's the Deal with Transport Emissions?" published on the December 12th, 2016, it states that 85% of emissions in Australia come from the cars on our roads. Therefore, with electric cars engineered to function without emitting harmful emissions, it makes sense to get more people to buy them, which would bring us just that bit closer to a world free of pollution as stated in the Paris Agreement. This is a pivotal reason why electric cars should be exempt from fuel excise tax, as it would encourage more Australians to purchase one, thus decreasing greenhouse gases. In an email we the negative team received yesterday, September 10, 2018, from Senator Jana Rice, the Australian Greens Senator for Victoria, whom we contacted to support our research into tonight's topic, she writes that we need to rapidly increase the numbers of electric cars to slash our CO2 to meet the Paris targets of keeping global warming under 2 degrees. Furthermore, she states that we need to offer incentives to encourage people to make the shift to electric cars in Australia, and not having to pay the fuel excise is a really important incentive for new car buyers. Therefore, electric cars in Australia should be exempt from fuel excise tax. Now, to my second point. Increasing the number of electric vehicles in Australia would benefit our economy. The CEO of the Australian Electric Vehicle Council, Bahad Jafari, in a report titled "Recharging the Economy," states that adopting electric cars in Australia will increase the gross domestic product by $2.9 billion a year, and there will be an increase in net employment by 13,400 jobs due to the building of new infrastructure for electric cars. Jafari has calculated that with an exemption from fuel excise tax, Australians who owned an electric car would be $1,700 better off per annum by 2030 just from this incentive. In another article, British billionaire eyes electric car plan for former Holden factory in the Australian Guardian on March 22, 2018, by Anne Davies, Sanjeev Gupta intends to develop the site as a manufacturing base for electric vehicles, which will see the 2/3 of Holden employees still unable to find work re-employed. Additionally, in the Advertiser, on Saturday, 8th of September 2018, billionaire Elon Musk Tesla has set up the group's first Australian battery and electric cars service centre within the Hunsley Innovation Precinct. Combined, those two have calculated that those two products will recoup the $1.24 billion loss to South Australia's economy. In conclusion, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we the negative team believe that making electric cars exempt from fuel excise tax in Australia will all be better off. It's a no-brainer. So, why are we still waiting?
Call upon the second affirmative speaker, Hanson 1.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that electric cars shouldn't be exempt from the fuel tax. We, the affirmative team, undeniably agree with this statement. Tonight, I'll be talking to you about the economic gains from this policy and how we need it to save our road infrastructure budget. I will also talk about how electric-powered vehicles are already cheaper in the long run, giving these car owners even less of a reason to avoid this tax. The first negative speaker has stated that electric cars aren't harmful to our environment, and this statement is absolutely false. Although they do not rely on petrol or diesel fuel, as mentioned by our first speaker, Lauren, electric cars still rely on being charged by electricity. According to Origin Energy, 94% of Australia's electricity supply comes from, you guessed it, fossil fuels. Electric car owners are still reliant on fossil fuels. And on another note, our new PM, Scott Morrison, recently backed out of the Paris Agreement, and therefore the goals indicated by the first negative speaker now have no more incentive. Now to my first point. Due to the fast and increasing rate of adoption for electric-powered vehicles, the share of vehicles using petrol fuel on our roads is steadily decreasing. As electric cars don't use petrol, the government is not taking in the 40 cents of tax for every litre of petrol that they would normally be receiving. This is due to create drastic consequences for the infrastructure budget, which greatly depends on the $10.8 billion generated annually by this petrol tax. This is no joke, as the full road infrastructure budget is barely $26 billion, meaning that the tax makes up more than a third of all the money going into our road development projects. With analysts predicting that half of all cars on Australian roads will be electric by 2055, the loss of revenue from this fuel tax is expected to eclipse $5 billion. This fund is a necessity for our country's growth, and if we're not getting it from fuel, then it's going to have to come from somewhere else. It's important to update this tax quickly to cover electric car owners, which, by the way, still use the same roads, as adoption rates are skyrocketing every coming year, and electric will be the future, whether we like it or not. Following on, my next point highlights the fact that electric vehicles are already less expensive to operate than petrol cars. Production costs of electric-powered vehicles are also becoming more affordable, with more and more car manufacturers filling their assembly lines with these vehicles. There are currently 16 electric cars available for sale in Australia, and 13 of these are over $60,000. The initial cost of purchasing an electric vehicle is high enough that only the wealthy individuals will choose to become an early adopter, and therefore electric cars as of right now should still be deemed as a luxury, not a necessity, as you can purchase petroleum vehicles for a much more affordable price. However, the one area where electric vehicles shine is the annual cost of operation. According to Electric Cars Guide Australia, electric cars cost around 3 cents per kilometre to run, while a similarly priced petrol car would cost around 12 to 14 cents. It's safe to assume that most electric cars today are in the possession of the wealthy upper class, who would have no problem paying a few extra cents every kilometre. Why should they be exempt? To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, this fuel tax is a necessity for our national infrastructure budget, and we need to take action immediately to include electric vehicles as part of this tax. The lost $5 billion in tax revenue aren't simply going to come out of nowhere, and it's clear that your average electric car owner isn't exactly struggling to pay the ATO. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Matthias McCarthy.
Good evening, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that electric cars in Australia should not be exempt from fuel excise tax. We of the negative team believe that the statement is false. The second in favour of the speaker has touched on the fact that electric car owners use the same roads as non-electric car owners. However, I ask you, cyclists and disability motor scooter riders also use our roads, so why are we ganging up on electric car owners? Our first speaker has already stated that by making electric cars in Australia exempt from fuel excise tax, the country will benefit environmentally and economically. Today I'll be talking to you about 2 points. Now to my first point. Electric cars should be exempt from paying fuel excise tax because they don't use fuel, meaning there will be better air quality. And better air quality means fewer health issues. According to the Australian government website, the Department of the Environment and Energy in 2015 explains that our air is polluted by trillions of ultrafine particles emitted from all vehicles. When inhaled, these particles travel through our bloodstream and central nervous system, lodging deep inside our heart and other organs, as well as being absorbed through the skin. This report also states that fuel emission-related illnesses include stroke, bladder cancer, asthma and lung cancer. Stated in an article written by L. Conway on news.com.au titled Electric Cars Boost Health on 17th August 2018, the group Environment Doctors of Australia say that poor air quality triggered by fuel emissions causes 3,000 deaths annually. This is supported in a report by the University of Melbourne published on April 27, 2017, written by Professor Carmen Talib, who stated that current vehicle emissions cause 40% more deaths than the yearly Australian road toll. This is because Australia has the highest allowable sulphur in its petrol in the OECD nations. This is not just an Australian issue. A survey conducted by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, titled Air Pollution Causes Early Deaths Each Year in the US, written by Jennifer Chu on August 29, 2013, on the mint.edu website, states that car exhaust doesn't just stink, it kills. In 2012, pollution from car and truck emissions caused 53,000 premature deaths per year. However, in 2017, according to the article, The Future of Electric Vehicles in the US by Jeffrey Lisman on Forbes.com, published on September 18, 2017, there are now over 80,000 electric cars in the US, and the death rate has fallen by 10% to 47,700. Therefore, these numbers prove that the uptake of more electric cars in Australia will end these harmful CO2 emissions and, more importantly, save lives. However, with no policy changes or exception from fuel excise tax, Australians have little incentives to buy them, which is why we only have a measly 1,124 electric cars on our roads. Now my second point. Electric cars cause less damage to our roads because they are lighter. According to the article Who's Afraid of Electric Vehicles, written by Nigel Morris on the renew.com.au website on February 12, 2018, it states that most importantly for road wear is the gearless, ultra-smooth linear drive of electric cars. What this means is that it enables the pulses of energy delivered through changing gears and the accompanying surges in rotation. This is often seen through ripples in bitumen, where heavy traffic is frequent. So, having lighter vehicles on our roads because less damage to them. Heavy vehicles obviously will cause more damage, and if vehicles were actually taxed on based on their weight, then the lighter, the better. In conclusion, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, from the evidence we, the negative team, have provided, electric cars should be exempt from fuel excise tax to encourage more Australians to buy them, which will benefit us all.
Call upon the third affirmative speaker, Michelle Oak.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, the topic for this evening's debate is that electric cars in Australia should not be exempt to fuel excise tax. We, the affirmative team, believe that this statement is true. As third speaker for the affirmative, I'll be summarising our team case. However, I would like to begin by pointing out the flaws in the arguments posed by the negative team. The first speaker for the negative said that they shouldn't have to pay for fuel because they run on environmentally safe electricity. The cars themselves may not use fuel, but the electricity is generated from fossil fuels, especially in Australia, where, as our first speaker spoke about, 94% of energy is non-renewable. Tesla and other companies are deceiving the market by parading the environmental benefits. In countries that run on renewable energy, this would make sense. However, in Australia, this is not the case. The bank invests $7 billion more into fossil fuels and non-renewable energy than it does into sustainable forms. This is because the market is so much larger and they are so much more commonly used. These cars do use fuel, just in a different way, and whilst they're labelled as green, they are not. Now, he stated that electric cars don't release harmful emissions and that the problem can easily be stopped by using renewable energy. This is not true, as switching to renewable energy costs millions of dollars, and, as our first affirmative speaker said, they are charged using fossil fuels. Electric cars are the future, but we must ensure that they are not freeloading. Now, he spoke about using renewable energy and it being enough to power electric cars. This is incorrect, as only a minuscule 6% of Australian energy is renewable, as our team spoke about. Electric cars are the future, and if numbers are to continue to skyrocket, renewable energy will not be enough. Now, their second speaker spoke about cyclists also using the roads. This may be true, but they only take up a small space, and cycles are environmentally safe, something that we, the affirmative team, have repeatedly explained that electric cars are not. Now, he also spoke about the health risks of petrol and how electric cars avoid this. As our first affirmative speaker spoke about, the electric car batteries are also harmful. Now, our first speaker, Lauren, discussed the cars not being any more energy efficient and that they are extremely misleading because they do contribute to carbon emissions. Furthermore, she spoke about the need to think to the future and accommodate for the predicted growth in use. Our second speaker, Hanson, spoke about the revenue generated by the tax and its importance to society, as well as the fact that electric cars are already cheaper to operate. Not to mention that they're more likely to be owned by wealthy people who can afford to pay excise because they still use the roads. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we believe that electric cars should not be exempt from fuel excise tax. To quote Trent Shelton, former American footballer and president of non-profit organisation Rehab Time, the right decisions are always the hardest, but they must be made. In an ideal world, the fuel excise tax would not even exist. However, our society would fall apart and our roads would physically fall apart, as the government would lose a significant amount of revenue. The tax may not be ideal, but the tax is necessary for our society to function, and that is why no road users should be exempt from it. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Todd Fogarty.
Good evening, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that electric cars in Australia should not be exempt from fuel excise tax. We, the negative team, believe that this statement is false. As third speaker for the negative team, I will now rebut the affirmative team's points and then summarise our team's case. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that they are not what they cracked up to be in terms of environmental friendliness. This is wrong because if Australia uses more renewable energy, which it quite easily can, solar, wind and hydro energy, then these are all free, easy, accessible and will provide the electricity needed for electric cars. This outweighs car fuel. The first affirmative speaker also tried to tell you, again, that they are not as green as they seem because of the power that goes into charging them. This, however, will not affect anything. Lithium only needs to be put into the car once and does not need to be replaced like fuel does. Besides, more lithium is used to make devices such as tablets than it is to actually make cars. The second affirmative speaker has tried to rebut our team's point about the economic benefit. However, as we have stated, it will still bring more benefit to us. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that the lost revenue of $7 billion, where the current expenditure on road maintenance is $22 billion. A solution suggested by the Productivity Review and hinted at by Fletcher is to scrap fuel charges and instead charge vehicles, both petrol and electric, for how many kilometres they drive, potentially using GPS tracking, known as road user pricing. And as our second speaker has told you, lighter electric vehicles, cars cause less damage to our roads. Therefore, tax heavier cars more to cover the money lost from making electric cars exempt from fuel tax. Second affirmative speaker has also tried to tell you that the cost will make a big impact. As our first speaker said, using the Holden plant would bring economy and also bring the price of the cars down because they will be mass produced right here. The third speaker has tried to rebut our team's case by saying that that the energy is not renewable, as they say. This is wrong because companies such as Tesla are building batteries that are easily accessible. Spend millions, save billions. I will now sum up our team's case. Our first speaker spoke to you about how making electric cars exempt from fuel tax would benefit Australia's environment and our economy. In Australia, with electric cars engineered to function without emitting harmful emissions, it makes sense to get more people to buy them, and making them exempt from fuel tax, excise tax, is one incentive that will work. Also, he told you that Australia's GDP would have $2.9 billion boost and that more jobs would be created. Our second speaker spoke to you about how making electric cars exempt from fuel excise tax will benefit the health of all Australians. He told you that car emissions don't just stink, they kill. Therefore, because electric cars do not use fuel, they do not emit any emissions. The cleaner the air, the less harm to us. So, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we the Negative team have proven to you tonight that electric cars in Australia should be exempt from fuel excise tax. They are the way of the future and Australia needs to urgently jump on the bandwagon.